Century, relations between America and Cuba have been effectively frozen, but now it seems times are finally changing. After less than 100 days in office, President Obama has lifted US travel restrictions to Cuba. And now the Cuban president, Raul Castro, has said his government is willing to talk to Washington about anything, including human rights. From Havana, Michael Voss reports.
Cuba, a country stuck in time. 50 years of embargo, hardship and isolation. Its iconic cars, a reminder of how long it's been since imports were allowed from the United States. Closer to Florida than Washington, D.C., yet still cut off from its giant neighbour 2 decades after the end of the Cold War. The seas of the Caribbean more effective than a Berlin Wall. But what a change 2 new presidents can make. This week, Barack Obama took a small but symbolic step. He lifted restrictions on Cuban Americans visiting relatives and sending money home, but said that the next move must come from Cuba.
A relationship that effectively has been frozen for 50 years is not going to thaw overnight. And so, having taken the first step, I think it's very much in our interest to see whether Cuba is also ready to change.
President Raul Castro's responded by saying that he's willing to discuss anything with the United States, providing there are no preconditions.
We've sent word to the North American government in private and in public that we're ready to discuss everything. Human rights, freedom of the press, political prisoners, everything, but on equal terms.
On January 2nd, 1959, the rebel army entered Havana.
When Fidel Castro came to power in 1959, he set out to create an idealistic society without private property. He expropriated farms and factories, many of them American-owned. The US retaliated with a trade embargo, followed by the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Then the Russians were caught trying to install ballistic missiles on the island. It was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. Despite a further tightening of the embargo under the Bush administration, the communist system never collapsed. The authorities here have spent years blaming the embargo on the poverty and all its problems, though recently it's admitted that its centrally controlled state-run system's also at fault.
These are early days. There are no signs yet of direct talks between the United States and Cuba. But with new presidents in both countries, there is a change of language, and it could mark an historic turning point. Both sides, it seems, are looking for ways to end this conflict, which is a leftover from the Cold War. Michael Voss, BBC News, Havana.
The mobile phone maker Sony Ericsson says it's cutting 2,000 jobs. It came as the firm reported a net loss of £316 million in the first quarter of the year. Sony has blamed the cuts on weak global